All right, so today let's do some new formulas again in, well, I'm going to be using Excel. You could use Google Sheets if you want to. Basically, we'll try to create some sum functions, some conditional sums, conditional counts, and different variations of conditions that are available in these functions. I'll ask CHAT GPT to create those functions, and then we'll talk about how exactly that works. We'll explain what the function does and things like that. So today I'm going to be using my own implementation of CHAT GPT, and basically it's just going to save me a lot of typing. But you could use the original CHAT GPT if you want to. You just would have to do a lot more typing to get to the same place. So, by the way, if you're a subscriber and you want to be one of the first people to test this, what I'm using today, drop a comment and I'll probably have a few people who'll just test this before I let more people use this. But for now, basically what I have is my Excel spreadsheet. Here it is. As you can see, there's not much happening here, nothing too special. Let's just start with something basic. Let's ask it to make total sales from this numbers, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to basically first explain the data to ChatGPT so it knows what it's dealing with. And for that, I'll just make it easy for me. I'll just grab that file right here. And that tab that I was on is this one, the one that's called data. Let's get this one out of the way and add this information. So there it is. That's that tab. It will give us the data range, etc., so it knows what to deal with. So I'll just ask the question. So I'll say how to get total sales. And I'll just go ahead and do this, and hopefully it will get us this. So as you can see, it gave me the formula. So if you're using the original ChatGPT, you would have to just go here and copy this from here, the formula. For me, I'll have this from here. I'll just copy it, go here and paste it right there. Well, or maybe I'll paste it a little here to this side. And as you can see, it got me the right formula, exactly the right column, the range, all of that seems to be accurate. That gives me the total. This is our typical sum function. Hopefully, if you've done a little bit of spreadsheet work, you already know how to do something like basic sum. And what it is, it's basically just a range formula that gives you the function sum, opens parentheses. It gives you a starting point, which in this case is E2, meaning this first E column, line 2, this first cell. And then it does the colon to convert this to a range, and then how far that goes. So E18 being the last cell all the way down here. So that would be this. So as you can see, that's that. So I'm just going to make this bigger so that doesn't show me the pound keys. It's a basic sum. Let's get rid of it. That I was pretty sure it would do that. So let's try to do some sort of conditional sum. Let's use the same data here. And let's ask it to maybe get us total sales for Midwest region. So I'll go back here and basically just ask a question. So I already gave it like my data and the boundaries and the columns, all of that stuff. I don't think I have to do it all over again, but just in case, let's just drop that information one more time so it knows where the boundaries of the data are. And let's just ask the question. Let's do how to get total sales for Midwest. Notice in explaining like my data here, I didn't really mention that Midwest is really in column anywhere. So all I've mentioned is what column names I have. And I'm hoping that based on this column names, it will figure out that Midwest is the region and go with that column. But let's see what happens. So I'm going to just run this and see what we get out of this. And as you can see, it gave me SUMIF function, and it chose, well, let's just copy it and we'll talk about that. So we'll copy that, go to our Excel spreadsheet, and I'll just paste that formula right here. And as you can see, it did figure out the column correctly. So it did figure out that B column is the one that has regions, the Midwest in it, and that's what it's pointing to. And then E would be our sales right here, and it's Midwest. So if I hit enter, see, that's now our total for just Midwest region. Now it chose to do SUMIF. There's also something called SUMIFS. So typically when I usually write formulas, I don't really use SUMIF all that often. I always tend to use SUMIFS. SUMIF is kind of like an old function. It was introduced, I believe, in 2003 version of Excel, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. But basically what happened is that it could only do one condition at a time. And then they figured out, well, if we want to do more conditions, we're going to need something else. So they changed and introduced the SUMIFs, which will do what SUMIF does. So let's go back and ask it to actually do the same formula with SUMIFs too. And then we'll talk about what is the difference between something like using SUMIF and using SUMIFs. So I'll just go back and ask a follow-up question here. I'm going to say, can you do this with SUMIFs? Like this. So let's see if it will give us the right formula. So that's my new formula now with SUMIFs. So I'm going to copy that. We'll go back to our Excel spreadsheet and paste this formula. And that's our SUMIFs. And as you can see, it gives me the same amount. Not formatted. I'll do some currency format here. But I do get the same amount. So the difference between SUMIFs and SUMIF is that SUMIF can only do one condition and SUMIFs can do multiple conditions. And because of that, the order of arguments is a little different. So if we look at this SUMIF example right here, so what happens with SUMIF function when you use the singular SUMIF, it starts with this, see, first it's going to choose this what's called criteria column. So the criteria column is the column we're going to use as a filter. So in this case, it's going to be this list of regions from B2 through B18. So this list of regions is what we're going to use to kind of filter our numbers. And then after the comma, we say which region we want to filter it to. And we have to have this value in quotes because we're typing text in a formula. Formulas basically will always need our text to be in quotes for it to be recognized as text. Because if you don't do these quotations, what it's going to do, it's going to look for a range or a function with this name Midwest, which doesn't exist, so you would get errors. So this has to be in quotations right here. And then finally, after comma, after this comma here, we do which column we actually want to sum, the numbers. And in this case, you can see that this E column is sales amounts. That's what we want to sum in this case. So that's our formula right here. So one of the things that I'm going to mention that you should be careful about when you use this function is to make sure that your range sizes match. So what I mean by that, look how we have this criteria range. It starts at line 2 and ends on line 18. So this one over here should also start and end in the same spot to have the same size range. You can see here, it goes, see, line 2 ends line 18. So that's something important because if you don't match them, you're going to get errors. Like, for example, if I change this to, let's say, start from line 1, because that's a common mistake that people do. They start selecting this, including the header for one of these, but they don't include the header for the other one. So now we have a mismatch of size. So if I hit enter, well, apparently it gave me a number, but whatever that number would be, this is not accurate. Apparently Excel had an update. This typically used to have a value error, but you can see that with those changes, the number is actually different. because it doesn't recognize what it should do. I'm not even getting an error, but I'm getting inaccurate results. So be careful with this. Don't mismatch the size, or you're going to deal with problems. Now, in our case, ChatGPT was able to get us exactly the right thing, as you can see, no problem. Now, let's talk about the same thing in SUMIFS, because the logic of the function is going to be exactly the same. What's going to change is the order in which you put these different three things. So when you do SUMIF, the first one is the column you use as a filter, the second one is the filter, and the third one is the column you sum. Now with SUMIFS, if I go here, what's going to happen, the order is different. So the first one is the range you want to sum. So that means the first would be the numbers column. So in this case, that would be the sales amounts. That's what we sum. Then the next column would be the filter column. So that would be this list of regions. And then what region we want to filter this to, which is Midwest. So just the order is different. So just know that's how it's going to work. And as I've mentioned, SUMIFS is a newer function as opposed to SUMIF. And if I go back here, see here it's not available. It's starting from a certain version. So apparently it's not compatible with like 2007 version of Excel either. So you might not want to use that if you have a very old Excel version. But other than that, you should be fine. If you want to use it in Google Sheets, if you want to use it in any modern version of Excel, you should be just fine with SUMIFS function. Now, let's try to get total count instead of getting total sum. So let's just say how many Midwest regions. Let's try to see if it will just understand that I'm looking for a formula like this, or maybe I have to ask what's the formula to count how many regions or something like that. Apparently it did give me a formula. It did give me COUNTIF formula, as you can see. So I'm going to copy this, go back here. So now we're going to get the count instead of the sum. So if I paste this, this is our COUNTIF function. And with COUNTIF function, again, see the first one is the range, the criteria range, meaning the column you're going to use as a filter. So that's this. And then after that, we have the condition. On this one, there's no column to sum because we're just simply counting things. And what it's going to do, see, it gives me 4. And basically what that means, if we go here, there's going to be 1, 2, where are the rest? 3 and 4 Midwests. So we just count. Also, you should probably know this is not case sensitive. So if I do like lowercase Midwest, uppercase Midwest, whatever, it wouldn't matter. I'm going to get the same exact results. So that's that. So we got COUNTIF. And by the way, there's also COUNTIFs. And with COUNTIFs, the syntax is actually not going to change on this one. So with COUNTIFs, if I just change this from COUNTIF to COUNTIFs and keep everything else the same, just copy paste, hit enter, I should be getting the same exact information here with COUNTIFs. Now, let's now understand why we have this COUNTIFs and SUMIFs as opposed to the old SUMIF COUNTIF functions. And the reason for that is because they can do more than one condition. So to do more than one condition, let's say we're trying to get Midwest total for Jennifer, something like that. So let's go ahead and ask that question. So again, I'm just going to add this data here. How to get Midwest total for Jennifer. Like this. So again, notice that in my explanation, where my data is, my columns, etc., I don't really have anything that explains that Jennifer is in like sales rep column or Midwest in region. I'm just hoping it's going to figure that out by the context. So let's just run this and see what happens. And there's my formula. So let's just go ahead and copy this. So now it has to use SUMIFS because SUMIF cannot do more than one condition. So I'm going to copy this, go here, and let's just paste this someplace in here. So you can see what happened. So in this formula, we start again with SUMIFS. You always start with your numbers you want to sum. So the first column is going to be the column of numbers. In this case, we have the sales amounts. That's this column E. So that's what we highlight. The next argument here after the comma is basically the criteria range. So one of the criteria ranges actually. So the first one is going to be, as you can see, the column C. So that's sales reps. And you can see it did figure out that Jennifer is supposed to be a sales rep, and it chose the right C column in this context, which is nice. So we can see we got the C column here, and we want it to be Jennifer. That is correct. And then we want the next criteria range to be this B column, which is this region column. And then that's Midwest. So this is how SUMIFS works. So basically, after you do your sum range, you can then do unlimited number of these pairs of criteria ranges followed by a criteria. So you do a column, comma, what you want from that column. And then comma, and then you can do another column and what you want from that column. And then you can go after this Midwest, do another comma, and do another pair like this. Which column and what you want to filter it to. Right now, I'm happy with this. So if we press enter, this should give us Jennifer Midwest combination total. And there it is. We got that number. See, Jennifer Midwest. Now you could, by the way, for any of these formulas, in this case, we're just hard coding the condition, but you don't really have to hard code any of these conditions. Like for example, if I add a column here just to have this a little better organized. For example, when I did this formula to get the Midwest total, what I could do, I could just go here and type like Midwest. And then we can go in this cell, and instead of here hard coding Midwest in the formula, I could just delete that and just point to the cell that says Midwest. Like this. And notice around G3, I'm not going to do quotations. Around Midwest, I was doing quotations because it was text. Around G3, it's a cell reference, so no quotes. So if I press enter, that should give me the same thing. So you could also just link to a cell instead of just typing the criteria directly in the formula. And the advantage of something like this would be like if you want to go here and change this Midwest maybe to West, and you want this number to update automatically, you can do that. So you can do something like that and get that done, and it should work just fine, no problem. And if you want this to be maybe more fancy, you could add like a drop down like data validation thing, so that you can have like an option if you're building this for somebody else to use, to choose an option. Like the Excel way of doing data validation would be if I click on this, go to data. Under data, we have this tiny little button for data validation. I could do this, and instead of any value, I can do a list. And here you could do the source as a comma separated list. So I can do like Midwest, comma, West, comma, I don't know, whatever other regions you may have. So you just comma separate all of those, no spaces before or after your commas. And basically what this is going to do is just going to give us a little drop down here so we can just flip between these options. This is more like user experience more than anything else at this point. It doesn't really do anything as far as the function itself, how it operates. But if you wanted to do something like this, you of course can. Now, again, you could do the same thing here. Instead of having Jennifer and Midwest directly in a formula, you could just type them in different cells and just point to those cells. I'm going to leave it at this. So that's our 2 criteria example for SUMIFS, as you can see. So let's also do something that will be using the same column as a criteria. So what I mean by that, let's do something with dates, for example. So if I wanted to maybe get total sales, like if you look here, I have like 2020, I have 2021, I have 2022, something like that. So let's try to give it like a date range and say, start from January 1st, 2022 and go until July or something like that. Let's see what it does. So I'm going to go here. And again, let's just quickly drop this here so it knows the boundaries. I think it already knew it by our comment below, but I'm just to be safe. So let's just say how to get total sales for date range. What do we have? So I'll just go January 1st, 2022 through June. Do we have 30 days or 31 days in June? I don't know. Let's just do June 30th. That's fine. Let's see what it does. So I didn't type the date in the format of the date. I just went with this more like flexible format to just check if it will actually do the right thing based on this. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what happens. So I'm going to do this. So there it is. So you can see it did do this formula and it actually looks accurate. So let's just copy that, go back and take a look. So I'm going to go back here and paste that right here. And we'll talk about how this works. And let me just make this a little smaller here so we can hopefully see more of this formula. So that's the total that I got. Let's add some currency format. Let's take a look at this and let's understand how exactly this works. So here again with SUMIFS, as usual, we start with the sum range. So the first column would be your numbers. That would be your sales column, this one. The second column is criteria range 1. Now that would be dates because we're trying to filter with a date range. So we're going to have to choose that A column where our dates are. So that's correct. Now after the comma, we have the criteria for this. And the criteria here is that, again, the criteria is you have to understand that when you do something like SUMIFS, COUNTIFS, like these functions, the criteria always has to be in text format. So you always have to put that in quotes, the criteria you use. So you can see here as a criteria I got, it has to be greater than or equal to 01/01/2022, which is our basically January 1st, 2022. So that's correct. Now, what happens then? Because if I just wanted to get all the numbers after January 1st, 2022, this would pretty much end here. So if I just remove the rest of this formula here and just leave it at this, this would just give me all the dates on or after January 1st, 2022. So if I press enter, this is just one condition currently. So that's going to work and it's going to give us starting from that starting point and after. Now, this is where to do a second criteria. What you're going to have to do after the comma, a common mistake that you'll see people do, they go here and do this. They do the other date here on this other side. So they will do like something like less than or equal to whatever that other date may be. Now, the problem with this is that this is not going to work. Because if you look at our function syntax, the next argument is the range, criteria range. So this is what I'm doing here is a criteria. It's not a criteria range. So since the next argument it's expecting it should be criteria range, you can't just do another criteria. What you're going to have to do is reselect the same A column for the second time. So you have to repeat that same column sometimes as a criteria range. And then after you do the comma, you'll get the criteria for this range you just selected. So again, I'm just going to hit escape, go back and recopy the formula that it gave me before, which should have been the right formula. And we'll talk about that, which would be basically what I was just mentioning you would have to do. I'm going to paste this here. Now, because the formula is long, it's kind of going here to the next line, but you can always watch the formula here on top here in the formula bar. As a single liner, it would be easier to read here. So you can see we did the first condition here, and then we do the next range, which is this date, and then we do less than or equal to June 30th, 2022. So this formula is what I call kind of accurate. And what I mean by that kind of accurate is that there could be potential problem with this particular way of writing this formula. And that problem could be if you have times in your dates. So what I mean by that, sometimes when you have dates in your column, it's just dates. But sometimes you can have date and time stored in the same column. So instead of like this being January 5th, 2022, it could be January 5th, 2022, 2 p.m. or 5 p.m. or 7 p.m. or something like that, right? Now, why is that important? The reason that's important is because when you do a formula like this and you say less than or equal to June 30th, 2022, it's going to read this as if that's June 30th, 2022, 000000. So 12 a.m. pretty much of January 30th. So for example, if I had data in this particular data sample that was June 30th, 1 p.m., that would not be included in this total that it's giving me. So if you want an accurate total and make sure it handles times too, if you have times in your dates, what's the best alternative here is to do this. Instead of doing this June 30th, 2022, is to go one day after. So I'm going to go July 1st, assuming we don't have 31st, July 1st, 2022, like this, since it's doing the 01, I guess I'll do the same syntax. So I'll go one day after, and then here, instead of doing less than or equal, I'll just do less than. And this way, even if I had something that's like 4 p.m., 5 p.m., whatever, they would be all included because now I'm saying just go before basically the 1st, which is July 1st, which means since I didn't do the equal, I just did less than, that would not include July 1st, but it would include everything before that. So that's that. I'm going to hit enter. That's my SUMIFS. And that gives me the data, as you can see. Okay, so that's SUMIFS with like date conditions. Let's try to do something a little more interesting. What if we want to do partial match? So not a lot of people know that with functions like SUMIFS, COUNTIFS, these functions, you're actually allowed to use partial matches too. So what I mean by that, let's say we have this category column and we want to go by containing a word. So let's say I want to grab sales total for anything, for any amount that has basically the word dress in it. So let's go and ask that question and see if it knows how to do this. So I'm going to go here and say how to get total sales for dress category. Well, actually, that would not be correct because it's dress category. It would just, well, actually, let's do this and then we'll ask a follow-up question. So let's do this. And that will give us hopefully an answer. And that's our answer. And as you can see, what this should do, it should basically just tell us total for dress category. So if I just paste that, it did figure out the columns correctly again. From what I can tell, I'm going to hit enter. See, that's going to give us this. And what this is, it's basically just going to find in this column, this one. Oops, let's just undo that. This one and this one. So those are the two numbers it's going to add. So currently it doesn't contain dress. It's just dress, which is the same thing we've been doing so far. So let's go ask a follow-up question. Can we do this for anything that contains the word dress? There it is. So I'm going to copy this formula, go back to our spreadsheet, paste this formula. Again, all these formulas, every single one of them should work in Excel and it should work in Google Sheets. Same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, hit enter, and you can see now I got a much higher number as opposed to this one, because with this formula, we're getting anything that contains the word dress, which means it would, for example, include like this and this and this. It would not include shoe polishers because there's no word dress in it. It would also include this, just dress, because just dress, it thinks that also contains the word dress. So that's how this works. Now let's look at that formula and understand how this works. Now it chose to do SUMIF. So the order of the arguments is going to be, the first one is going to be the criteria range. So criteria range meaning this D column where we have all these different categories. And the next one after that is the criteria. And what happens here, you can see now instead of just dress in quotes, we have these two stars before and after the word dress. And that's a wildcard character. Basically, by putting a star in this condition, we're saying in this position where we put the star, we're expecting possible other characters. We're not requiring them to be there, but there could be other characters here in this position where the star is. And you can see I have another star here on the right side. Now, when you put stars on both sides, basically that means contains. You're saying on the left side of the word dress, there could be some characters, and on the right side of the word dress, there could be some characters. And that's exactly what we get from this particular formula. Now, what I could do, I could just do the star on one side without having the star on the other side. So to give you an example, if I remove this star from the beginning and just keep the star in the end, like this means I'm not really expecting anything before the word dress, but there could be things after the word dress. Now, what's going to happen with this formula now? What it's going to do, this one right here, it's going to get me anything that starts with dress. So if we look at this different variations here, what that would include, it would include this, just dress. It would include this one, just dress. It would also, for example, include this one, dress to impress, because that also contains the word dress. So that would be included in our sum as well. So that's what this is doing. So basically, it's like starts with. So you're saying it starts with dress. Or you can do the opposite flip here. What you can do, you can put the star in a beginning and not have the star in the end. So now with this, you're saying there could be some things before the word dress, but after the word dress, there should be nothing. So what that means right now, if I press enter, what it's going to include, it's not going to include this dress to impress anymore because that doesn't end with dress. It would include these two, but it would also, for example, include this like contemporary dress. It would include this cocktail dress. So those are the ones that end with dress with some characters before the word dress. So what I'm trying to say here is that with the stars, it's not like you always have to have them both before and after. You can kind of mix and match and figure out where the star should go. As a matter of fact, you can even put that in the middle. So for example, if I put the star before and after, this just contains dress. But I could, for example, go here, do dr star, and then ss and another star. So now I'm having 3 stars in this formula. And basically what I'm saying is that before this dr, there could be some characters. Then after dr, between dr and ss, we could have some other characters too. And then finally, after the whole thing, we again could have more characters. So if I hit enter, you'll see it will still match a bunch of stuff. So anywhere where it finds dr followed by ss, it would be included, which obviously where we have dress, it would have dr followed by ss. So that's going to be included. Now, most of the people, when they do something like this, they just want contains. And if you just don't want to think about most of this, you just want to say contains, this is your contains. So just put star before and after the word and you're done. And that's your contains sort of statement. So that's that. So let's also try to do something with the switch with the not equal to. And by the way, just to make sure that it's understood, this same thing can be done with SUMIFS too. So you can still do this. It's just your order of arguments is not going to be the same. So with SUMIFS, instead of SUMIF, you would start with sum range. So that would be this right there. Then you would do a comma. Then you do criteria range. That would be this category column. That would be the second argument. And third argument would be the criteria. This is where you would do that star, the rest, star. So basically the same arguments just repositioned. It should still give us our results. See, the same as this one, same number. It works just fine. Only this time you can do more conditions. You can do comma and do another pair of like a column and a condition. So now let's try to do something like everything except this. So basically not equals what I want to do. So let's ask a question. Let's try to get all sales for everybody except Grace. So something like that. So I'm going to ask you, can you do sales? Let's do total sales for everybody except Grace. Well, let's just type except correctly, I guess, and let's see what happens. So, wow, that's a lot more complicated than I thought it would do. I'm not even sure if this formula is going to work. I think it may work in Excel in the new version, but I don't think this is going to work in older versions of Excel because it's doing an array. We'll see. Let's just try and see what happens. Okay, so this is completely inaccurate. It got all the ranges incorrectly. Maybe I should have dropped the data one more time. But the thing is, like, even if I correct those, let's go to, instead of 6, go to like 18 here, 18 here, and 18 here. Let's see what it's doing here. So yeah, so as you can see, this is complete garbage. So that formula is completely not right. Let's try to do a follow-up question. Is there an alternative? No, now that's a lot better. This is what it should have been the first time. So I'm going to copy that. Let's go back here and we'll just paste it here. It didn't get the range of data correctly. I think it would be correctly done if I first included that data all over again. Apparently it didn't pick up from the previous questions what the data range is, but it's fine. I'm just going to update this. So instead of 6, we'll go to line 18. Instead of this 6, we'll go to line 18. Like this. And that did not work. Let's see what happened here. Oh, so it chose the wrong column, apparently. You know what? It didn't do this. I'm guessing what it's doing here, it's because I didn't include the data boundaries in the question again. This is where it got confused. So I'll go back and re-ask this question, including data boundaries. But for now, let's just fix this. So what this should be, the first argument here should be the list of names. So this gave us the list of dates from a column, which is not accurate. So since this is using SUMIF, not SUMIFS, the first one is the criteria range, meaning it's going to be, well, it's going to be, since I want people, salespeople. That's what it's going to be. Now that's going to be this sales reps. Then we got this one. This would be the actual range to sum. So instead of B, we want to sum this. So this would be the right columns now. Let's hit enter, and that would be accurate. So this would be our total for anybody that's not Grace. So long story short, if you wanted to get the total for Grace, your formula would look like this. So if I just go back and remove that not equal sign and do just Grace, this is what our typical formula looks like if I wanted to get the total for Grace. If I hit enter, this is what it looks like. That gives me the total for Grace. However, if I want to do the total for everybody except Grace, then I can do not equals Grace. like this. And that's that not equal sign. Hit enter. And that would be, as you can see, that total. So that's how this works. And by the way, if you do equals grace like this, that is literally the same as not putting the equal sign. So when you typically just type grace and you get your total, that's the same as saying equals grace. And you would get the same total. So when we do not equals grace, basically we're saying instead of equal grace, let's do not equal grace. That's what we do in that particular case in this flip. Now I want to go back and ask this question and see if it can get this right if I provide the data boundary instead of doing this. So let's just add this information first and say, can you use this data range? Do I have to re-ask the question? I'm curious, or can I just do this? So it gave me all the stuff. Apparently, I should probably ask the question all over again. So let's try it again. It gave me two formulas. Both of them are not accurate. So how to get total sales? Let's do it this way. For everybody except Grace. Let's see if this way it will give us the right thing. Okay, so there it is. I'm going to copy now that formula. Now, when I was asking the question, I did include the data together with that. So I'm going to go here and paste the formula. So as you can see, when I did include all the data information and all that stuff, it figured it out just fine. So it does link to the right column this time. So it does the not equal Grace, it gives me the options, no problem. But I would think that it would understand by the context from the previous question what the data boundary is, but apparently you have to keep telling it what it is, at least for now. I'm sure it's going to change in future. So there it is. I'm not sure if there is anything left with this, different functions. Let's also just do a quick count example that we did. So for all of these, you can do the same with counts, right? So for example, here we did like sum sales for anything that has dress in this category column, but maybe you just want the count of things that have the word category in them. So we can go back and ask that question. How to get total count of categories that contain the word dress. Okay, so I'm going to copy this. We're going to go back. And we'll just, I'm running out of space here. I'll just put it here. So there it is. See, it did grab the category column, and it does do that, contains dress. And again, because it's count, there's no sum range, so there's no numbers to select. So we'll get that, no problem. Now, finally, let's do one last example that I think maybe we didn't do, is filtering by number. Because we filtered by date, we filtered by text. But what if you want to, for example, get total sales for any amount that's above $8,000 in this column? So that would be filter with a number. And depending if you use SUMIF or SUMIFS, this formula would probably look a little different. But let's just ask and see what it gives us, and then we'll talk about what that would be. So we're trying to get totals only for numbers in this column that are above $8,000. So let's go ahead and do that. how to get total sales only for sales amounts that are above 8,000. So I'm going to assume it's going to give me some if for this one, not some ifs. It's thinking for longer than I expected it would. There it is. That is correct. So that's some if function. So with some if I go back and let me just clear some of this and we'll just paste it here. And there it is. So with some if here, we have this formula. I'm going to hit enter so you can see that this works. It will actually give me all the numbers that are above 8,000. If you wanted to include 8,000 as one of the numbers that's inclusive, you would do greater than or equal to like this instead of just greater than in these conditions. But if you want strictly above 8,000, then you would do just greater than like this. So that's that. So with some ifs, what happens here is that the sum range argument is optional argument. See, it's in square brackets in the end, which means what happens when you skip that sum range, it will use the first range you've provided as the sum range too. So basically what happens here, we start with a criteria range. We're saying these are the criterias. We have these numbers. And then we're doing the criteria. We're saying those numbers have to be above $8,000 like this. And then usually the last one is the range you want to sum. But if you skip it for some if function, it will automatically default to using that first range you provided as the range for summing. So basically you can think about it as repeating this E column as the sum range. Now with some ifs, the same formula would look a little different. So if I go some ifs, what's going to happen, sum range is the first argument. So we would have to do this list, comma, and then we have criteria range, which in this particular case, it's the same exact range. So that means this is not an optional thing. You have to do it. So you would have to repeat this same column again, comma, and then finally you would do that greater than 8,000 thing, the criteria over here, and that should also give us the same results. So as you can see, a little different, not too much. Again, my recommendation for people who are new to spreadsheets, if you're going to start using these functions, probably just stick with some ifs. So it will create less confusion then of thinking like sometimes it's this order, sometimes the other order. Just stick with some ifs, always use some ifs, and then your order will be always the same sum range first, and then the rest of that follows this. And possibly the last thing very quickly I'm going to cover in this one is, let's say you don't want to hard code this 8,000 number in here. You want to be able to just go here, type that 8,000 here, and let's just make this bigger a little bit. Apparently this formatted as a date. Let's get rid of that formatting. I'm going to make it currency. So essentially, maybe what you want to happen, you want to be able to just change this 8,000 number, and based on that, you want this formula to update. But currently, this formula has this hard-coded 8,000 here. Now, you have to remember that this condition is text. So you have to figure out a way to build this text in the formula. And the way you can do that is by basically using concatenation. And if you are not familiar with concatenation, I would really suggest just watching a separate video just about concatenate and understand how the process works. But here, just to give you a simple example here, what I would do, I need something that's greater than 8,000. Here, I just have 8,000. So what I would do, I would remove 8,000 from this hard-coded part of the formula, go after the string notation after quotes, add an ampersand, which is the and sign, which is concatenate, like plus sign for text. And then I can point to the cell that has 8,000 in it. So this way, now if I enter, it will still give me the same amount, but now it's using this number 8,000 here. Now let's actually change this to greater than or equal to, like this. And now what it's doing, it's tied to whatever number I have here. So if I change this number to 6,000, now this total will update to include all the numbers that are 6,000 or higher in this column. So basically that would include like all of these numbers here. It would not include these two because they're not. It would include this two. It would include this, and then this, and then this. So these would be the numbers included now in our total based on this formula we just did. So there you have it. That's our SUMIFs, COUNTIFs, all this conditional summing and stuff like that, how all of this works in a formula like this. And as you can see, we were able to get most of this pretty fine using CHAT GPT to give us the correct formula, assuming you always provide your data and tell it where the columns are and the range and all this stuff first. It will then kind of get us the right thing in the end. Otherwise, it gives you some formula which sometimes it's right, sometimes it's not right, and sometimes it's weird. But there you have it. Hopefully you've learned something. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.